Hello, everybody. My name is Caroline, and I woke up today and I chose violence. So, today you're gonna be witnessing me doing something that I've never done before, and that is reading from Dostoevsky. I'm gonna be attempting to read The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky in this reading vlog. This is my book club pick for the month of March, along with Sickness Unto Death. I am both excited and terrified at the same time because I have never read from Dostoevsky before. I've heard that he can be a lot, he can be intimidating, but I've also heard that his stories are always so satisfying and worthwhile. And since my library doesn't have a copy of The Idiot, I'm gonna be reading The Idiot digitally on my Books e-reader. And according to my Books e-reader, this book has 1,068 pages. I'm currently on page 71. I started this book last night already, and so far I do have to agree that it is a lot and very confusing sometimes, especially if you don't keep a character list. So what I have been doing recently is keeping book journals, and specifically for The Idiot, I've also been keeping a character list, which is down here. So far I've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 characters being introduced, even though we are only 71 pages into the book. And so I need to physically write down their name because I'm not Russian. So Russian names can look very intimidating to me, and also they look confusing sometimes. So I just need to write down also with their occupation and the role in the story that these characters have. I know who the main character is. We're following Prince Mushkin, who comes from a family that used to be very wealthy and noble, but recently they have fallen out of their wealth and their riches, and he's apparently is the only other person living in his line, along with another female character named Elizabeth Prokofievna. If I butchered that name, I apologize very deeply. Elizabeth Prokofievna, she is the wife of the general Ivan Fedorovich Epankin. Apparently they are very powerful, they are of importance in society, and so recently Prince Mushkin, he went from Switzerland back to Russia. He spent 4 years in Switzerland because he was ill, and there's a doctor there, also a professor that took care of him, also taught him a lot in terms of like knowledge and stuff. So he spent 4 years in Switzerland, and now he's come back to Russia. And because he has been away for a while, and he's also the last member of his line in his family, he doesn't know anybody else except the Epankin, so Elizabetha and the general. Right now, at the point that I'm reading, he's come to the general's office to make his acquaintance. But even though we've only been like 71 pages in, I've had some insights and some first impressions already. The first thing that struck me was this concept about the certainty of death being more dreadful and more cruel and evil than death itself. And this happened prior to Prince Mushkin meeting the general. He was on the train, right, going to the general's office, and he met these two people, a clerk and another person named Rogojin, who recently came into possession of his inheritance. So Rogojin recently became very rich, and they were just like chatting, gossiping, and the clerk told a story about this criminal who just got executed. He got a death penalty. And Prince Mushkin was proclaiming how to execute a man for murder is to punish him immeasurably more dreadfully than is equivalent to his entire crime. The man who is dispatched by burglars at night or in the gloom of a wood or anywhere undoubtedly hopes that he may yet escape until the very moment of his death. But in a case of an execution, that last hope is taken away from the wretch and the certainty substituted in its place. And this is on page 17 out of 22 on chapter 2 on my digital version. And I wrote, the certainty of death is more dreadful than death itself. Is this why death penalty is ruled out and banned in some countries? So first of all, that first concept about hope and the importance of hope and whether or not a death penalty is unjustifiable because of the lack of hope for even the criminals. And then also when Mushkin met the general, The general found it odd and unbelievable even that Mushkin came all the way on the train and everything to his office just to make his acquaintance and just to kind of introduce Mushkin to the general without asking any favors, since Mushkin knew that the general and his family are very powerful, but he didn't ask for any favors. It was just like a quick conversation, a quick chat. I would assume that being as high up as he is on the social ladder would be accustomed to people asking for his favors all the time and sometimes even being taken advantage of. And so Mushkin, even though Mushkin is a relative of his wife, he didn't expect Mushkin to just be that naive and simple and just wanting to make his acquaintance. So that first detailed and about the concept of hope and execution really painted Mushkin to be somebody who is pretty naive and simple in the best way possible, but also somebody who has such a strong moral compass and has a strong manners and etiquette and just politeness in general. Because he sometimes is too polite and too morally obligated to follow his moral compass, he can sometimes be deemed too naive. So that's the point that I'm at. And in fact, the general did tell Mushkin that, quote, "You are too much of a philosopher." So that's all my initial thoughts. So far, I could definitely see that I'm in for a ride and that this writing style can be both confusing and very rewarding at the same time, because there's not a lot of references to who's speaking and who's like in dialogue. So sometimes I do have to guess a little bit to know like who's talking, what are we doing, who's the main subject that we're talking about. But once I grasp it, and I also have my little character index over here, that helps. But once I grasp the entire scene and the situation, I think I could get so much valuable insights and just thoughts and analyses about life out of just a couple of pages. Okay, that's my update and very long rant about the first impressions of the book. I do know for a fact that this vlog is going to be a long one, filled with all of my thoughts and analyses and quotes being read out to you guys from my journal. So if you also have been scared to read The Idiot by Dostoevsky, why not just pick up the book now and let's buddy read together? That being said, grab a drink, settle yourself into your cozy little area, and let's keep going with the video. A reading update for The Idiot. I did actually read a couple of such beautiful writing last night that it kind of struck me for a second. So the first kind of scene that I do want to talk about is at the very beginning of The Idiot, where Mushkin was talking about this like execution scene, and he was retelling the story of how he was there in the scene when the execution of a criminal was being enacted. And he was retelling this to Mrs. Epankin and also the three daughters. So this is like the families of the general. I do want to say that the writing style was so vivid and real, but it's not a stream of consciousness whatsoever. Dostoevsky somehow sticks very, very true to the actual emotions and the feelings within the scene. The way that Dostoevsky was describing this criminal's face and expressions, and how all of his thoughts are revealed through his facial expressions when he knew that he was about to be executed and about to die. I could picture the scene in my head. It's like a painting of remorse and despair and just like this loss of hope. And we were talking about earlier, right, how this like certainty of death is more dreadful and more evil than death itself. And here Mushkin is diving deeper, or Dostoevsky through Mushkin is diving deeper into the morality of the death penalty. He was retelling this specifically to the youngest daughter, who is very gifted with painting. And he was like, oh, if I could describe the scene to you, can you paint me the painting of how the scene looks like? And she couldn't do that because it's packed full of emotions. And I could really, like, truly, I kid you not, I could picture it in my head. And that's like the first time that I was able to do that. It's such a unique writing style. Like I mentioned, it's not overly descriptive or flowery. It's very sticking to the reality, but somehow all the details that he brought up really add to this bigger picture. And he was describing like the audience, interaction between the audience and the criminal, the priest, and everything in between. That's like the first scene that struck me and made me think that Dostoevsky's writing and Mushkin's ability to recount and retell all of his like past memories in a way that's very imaginative but still morally grounded in a sense. And then the second scene is when Mushkin, once again, was retelling the stories of his earlier years to the general's family. And specifically, he was focusing on when he was in Switzerland, like the 4 years that he was in Switzerland, and how he was befriending all the children in the village. At the beginning, the children kind of feared him, how their relationship kind of ebbed and flowed, and then they got to become close friends, best friends at the end. That scene touched me. It was like so beautiful, so precious. And particularly, he was also retelling the story of Marie, which is like a very poor peasant, a very poor girl. She ran away with one of the men. I don't know where he came from, but she ran away from her life, her village, her town, just for her to then be rejected and kind of left behind by this man, so that she had to come back to her village now that she's poor, wretched. You know, she's very pitiable, basically. But when she came back to her village, all the members of this town, including her mother, showed such a hateful disdain and just like hatred towards her. She was discriminated against. Nobody treated her like a human being. She also was very poor. She couldn't find a job because everybody in this town didn't like her, didn't respect her as a person, so they didn't want to give her a job. But then through Mushkin, he showed pity for her and he showed her mercy. He befriended her. He treated her like a human being with respect, without any judgment towards her past actions and decisions. From him being this kind of like bridging point between Mary and the children specifically, that brings the other people in the town and the village to come to pity her and to also feel sympathy and apathy for her, that when Mary died, the children were always there for her. They loved her. They grew to love her actually through Mushkin. And at the end, even when she passed and when she was in the process of passing away, the children showed her mercy and love and kindness in the world that didn't want to give her those. Oh, and the one thing that I took away from reading those two scenes was how the community around you could really make a difference. And it doesn't have to be other adults or other members of society that have the same social standing as you, the same age, the same experiences, but sometimes children and people who are young, naive, childish actually are the people who understand you for who you are, without judgment and without any sort of like disdain, evil feelings, negative feelings, and that could really helps you become a better person. It just takes one person, you know, and in this case that was Mushkin, to befriend her, to show her, and also to show other people in the village that she also deserved to be respected and treated with kindness despite all her past experiences and actions. I've never read anything like that before. It's like very philosophical, but at the same time it uses very mundane examples and stories of real people, especially poor people, to highlight those moral obligations, the philosophy of Mushkin and the philosophy of Dostoevsky. The fact that Mushkin can come to grasp the underneath, the deepest level of meaning from those two scenes show that he is a very kind person, but not just kind in the traditional sense. He's just like sometimes overly optimistic, that borderlines philosophical. And so that's why when other people who don't understand him and his sense of philosophy and his sense of mannerism, if you will, look at him, they tend to think him as like being overly simple and naive. But in fact, he sees everybody for who they are. And above all, he chooses to see them for what they can be and their potential without any judgment towards their other evil aspects or like dark, shadowy parts. That's the update. Really enjoying reading this book so far. As you can see, I'm at my lab, so I just could not find another time to record this update for you, because I just brought you here to my lab. While this machine is running, I can talk to you a little bit more about The Idiot. After finishing this book, if it keeps up, which I think it will, keeps up with whatever it's doing right now, the writing style, the philosophy, the storytelling, imagination, it will become one of my favorite books of all times, if not my favorite book of all time. I just have to start collecting other editions and translation and having my own physical copy of The Idiot. Update. It's gonna be a long one, so buckle up. I have been reading The Idiot very smoothly, and it's been going very well until it hit a point where it was very hard for me to comprehend what was going on. I don't want to say that Mushkin is an unreliable narrator, but the way that his inner dialogue was written was pretty snappy and sometimes kind of irrelevant. It was like he was switching between emotions very quickly, and that caught me off guard, and that made the experience a little bit more tricky to understand and to follow what he was trying to do and feel. But I do have 2 points and 2 things that struck out to me. The first one is Nastasia Filipovna as a character. She is a walking contradiction herself. And the reason why I said this is because at one point she was portrayed to be this very unique and above everybody else type of woman, in the sense that even though she was surrounded by riches and wealth and she was showered upon by Dostoevsky with all sorts of luxuries and wealthy trinkets, right? But she's not dependent upon riches and wealth, and she has made it clear that she could live without all of those luxuries. And then all her servants are females, which I thought was interesting. One of her maids, when the maid first saw Mushkin, Prince Mushkin, when he was fresh off his journey, got off the train, his appearance was not very polished and poised and elegant. In fact, his clothes were very dirty. But the maid doesn't judge Mushkin upon seeing him and how he's not looking very noble-like. Some of the things that made me think that, oh, maybe, you know, Nastasia is a character that was inherently good and very kind, but on the outside, people tend to misread her, and she tend to come off as somebody who is like a bit bitchy or a bit just like cruel and proud and arrogant because she is too polite, things like that. But then it kind of took a flip-flop, especially when it gets to the point where Nastasia's marriage was concerned and she has to make a decision of who to marry because she's beautiful, she's very noble, like she's like striking, her beauty is striking and one of a kind, so she has a lot of suitors and pursuers. And so she basically had to choose between Gania, which is the friend of the general, and also Parfen Rogojin, which is one of the people that were on the same train as Mushkin when he was traveling to meet the general. And Rogojin recently came into a big inheritance after his father passed away, so he apparently is a millionaire right now. Rogojin, when he came to pursue and court Nastasia, he was very upfront about him being able to provide for her, and in fact he just gave her a bunch of money in cash. Whereas Gania doesn't have a dime to himself. He used to be a blackguard, and the fact that him being a blackguard was very shamed upon and was like apparently a very shameful event or incident, this like made me question what is the blackguard. I think that was one of the notes that I put down to do some further research onto, like what is the significance of somebody being a blackguard and what does that tell the readers and the audience about their characteristic, their personalities, things like that. Because Gania doesn't have money and he's very poor, the reason why he wanted to marry Nastasia was because of her money. Her interacting with all of those people, like all of those men, made me feel like she's a very bitchy woman, but the way that she interacted with Mushkin was very different. Apparently, Mushkin was able to kind of convince her, talk to her in a way that made she realize that she is not that sort of woman. That sort of woman, in my personal, very humble opinion, is the sort of woman that's just like very flirtatious, you know, trying to like seduce a bunch of men at the same time and trying to be very, very hard to get, playing hard to get, pretending to be hard to get. After Mushkin said that, Nastasia was instantly like, oh yes, I'm not that sort of woman, and so she righted her behaviors and changed her behaviors, tried to avoid all those behaviors. Other people, upon seeing that Mushkin was able to persuade Nastasia to behave properly, thought that Nastasia was in love with Mushkin. So that's the first thing. You know, Nastasia was a very interesting person. I don't know whether or not she's like a good person or an evil person. I think that's intentional from Dostoevsky's side and perspective. I think now that we have Mushkin is a very good, polite, kind person, definition of an angel, if you will, among all these very evil people. Not evil, they're just like malicious and cunning in the worst way possible. I have yet to found the other extreme of Mushkin. I think that could be Gania. Gania is also a very interesting person. Because of that, we needed a middleman, you know, somebody who's in the middle, kind of like sometime leaning towards good and then the other time kind of falling towards evil, just to make everything a little bit more interesting. And I think Nastasia is that person as of now. Gania is also a very interesting person. There's some hints that Gania is trying to change to become a better person, like a better man, because apparently he was still very affected by his past of being a blackguard, but I haven't seen that to be expanded upon further, so hopefully that's going to be another interesting person that we can follow. So that's the first thing that struck me, you know, Nastasia as a character, as an individual, what she symbolizes and, you know, an example of. The second thing is somehow plot twist. So there's a lot of quarrel about Nastasia's marriage, you know, there are two sides and each side is just trying to like draw her to them and trying to persuade her that marrying them is the better alternative compared to the other side, playing tug and pull basically of Nastasia. Prince Mushkin saw that Nastasia was struggling and that this kind of argument and conflict is not going anywhere. He suddenly proposed to marry Nastasia. That was like a plot twist that I did not see coming. There was just like this long paragraph of just Mushkin flattering Nastasia and complimenting her, saying that she is a very noble person and that it's his honor to be able to marry her and to be able to call her Mrs. Mushkin, right? Another plot twist is that Nastasia rejected Prince Mushkin, and then she kind of half agreed with Rogojin's marriage. Remember, like the millionaire, the very rich one? But she only half agreed. She was like, okay, we'll see about that, but I'm not outright rejecting you, but I'm also not outright agreeing with you. You know, that's her attitude. Rogojin now perceived Mushkin to be his rival, his enemy, and that's where I'm at right now. And that's where I've hit kind of this reader block where it's very hard to comprehend where Mushkin is going with all of his emotions and where Dostoevsky is going with all of his inner dialogues and thoughts and everything. I'm on page 408 out of 1,000 and something pages, so I'm like almost 40% in. I do want to get to the halfway mark tonight if that's possible. I don't want to spread this out even further because I know that I'm gonna get bored. So I'm gonna try to push through this reader block that I'm having. Hopefully it's all gonna make sense. And I feel like this is very similar to the beginning, because the beginning of the book to me was also pretty hard, because once again it was like lacking references to who was talking. All the names sound the same and look the same to me, so that was very hard to kind of gauge like who is in charge of what action, and is it like Mushkin doing this, or is it another character, and is it this his thought, or is it another character's thought, all jumbling up in my head. I do have one more thing before I let you go though. I have a book haul, a library book haul. I didn't buy any books, although I did go to Walmart yesterday for like groceries and stuff, and I had to stop by to their book sections because duh. I saw, first of all, a bunch of romantasy books. Like, was it Fourth Wing, Onyx Storm, Bridgerton book for the season that's streaming right now, and just like a bunch of things. And I also saw like The 40 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. I almost picked it up because it was like in clearance and it was like $7 for a book, but I had to restrain myself, and I was very proud of myself for being able to do that. Because of that, I had to do a book crawl today, and I went to several spots around where I live where they have little free libraries. I went to one and they didn't have a ton of books. It didn't have any books, to be honest. It was just mostly magazines and vinyls, and I don't know. So I didn't pick up anything from that. So I had to go to my public library next. I was just like, it's like St. Patrick's Day when I'm filming this. And it's so like everybody was around. It was everybody was out and about and running around. And so I was also glad that I was doing a bit of a stroll downtown. I picked up 4 books. I know I returned 3 books and I picked up 4 books. So to me, I'm back to square one. Not even square one. I'm back to square -1 because I picked up 4 books instead of 3. But I do have plans for all of these books, and obviously I have more library books back here that I need to finish. I think I can finish it next week, because after next week we have spring break, and so I have a lot more time on my sleeve to just read nonstop. But anyway, I picked up this book. This is Strange Houses by Uketsu. I wanted to pick up this book the last time I went to the library, but I just could not find it. Maybe somebody checked it out. This is popping up on Book Talk and just like the book community as a whole. It's a thriller, and I've never seen anything like this before. Apparently, it's like somebody moved into this house, but the floor plan of the house is very weird. And throughout the book, they have different pictures. Let me show you. They have different pictures to kind of demonstrate what the author was trying to say. And so this is like a big kind of thriller mystery of some sort. And I'm super, super excited to be getting into this book. And then the next one that I picked up is also popping up on Book Talk. And this is Red City by Mary Lou. I almost picked up this book the last time I went to the library, but last week or 2 weeks ago, I had 7 books checked out, so I just could not bring myself to just check out another book, so I put it back. But this time I went, and it's still there, so I picked it up. And this is like a very, I think, an urban fantasy sort of situation. I don't know what this is about. I think the magic system is about alchemy, and I'm interested to see how that's gonna go, because the last alchemy book that I read was Alchemized, and that was a hit. So those are the first 2 books that I picked up. And then, okay, I picked up mangas next, 2 mangas, and hear me out. I've been following Bella, so Throne of Pages on YouTube, for a long time. Now, recently I watched one of her 24-hour readathons, and she read A Sign of Affection. Oh, it's upside down. A Sign of Affection. And this is like kind of a compilation of the first 3 volumes, so that's why it's a bit thicker. And Bella read this series. I think she's on volume 6 or volume 12 or whatever, but she loved it. And also I was intrigued, and so I had to check to see if my library had it, and they did. So I picked it up, and I'm gonna be doing also a 24-hour readathon next week during spring break, because I have a lot of time to read, and I can finish this book next week. The other manga that I read was also inspired by Bella, and I know that she's such a big One Piece fan. And yesterday when I went to Walmart, they also had One Piece. They had this specific version. It's like, once again, a compilation of the first 3 volumes of One Piece. I've never read One Piece. I've never watched One Piece. I'm not a manga fan. I mean, I liked reading manga, but I'm not obsessing over them, but I do want to try it out. And also because I'm reading a graphic novel and I found it to be very great palate cleansers, kind of like a companion read with other classics or intimidating books to allow me to take a break from reading big books like The Idiot, for example, when I need to, and then kind of refresh my mind by reading all of those graphic novels and mangas and then go back to reading The Idiot with like a fresher mind and appetite, things like that. So I'm thinking of also doing this for my 24-hour readathon next week as well. So those are the 4 books that I picked out from my library trip this week. But anyway, that's a very long rant in terms of update. I'm gonna go read now, have a bunch of time to read today, which I'm super excited about, and then I'm gonna check back with you in a second. Tell me why, but The Idiot by Dostoevsky is reading a lot like a thriller slash a mystery, because it's been hinted upon about how elusive and unclear and hidden and concealed Nastasia's incentive and motive is. Up until this point where I'm at, which is the 50% mark of the book, Nastasia's behaviors were a lot confusing just because she's trying very hard to destroy people's lives, or at least cause up some ruffles and just like some unpleasant news and information about the people surrounding Mushkin and the Pankins, the general, just like everybody around her. She just like keeps going about and figuring out some more gossip to start and just like trying to, I don't want to say she's spreading information, because everything that she said or the so-called gossip that she talked about turned out to be true later down the road. And so that just proves to us that she's like a prophet, you know, she's like a seer. Whoever she pinned or whoever she was like going about and spreading bad reputation about turned out to not be a good person as they seemed. One example was there is this, I think, another soldier or a military person whose name is Evgeny, Evgenie, and he is a recent acquaintance of this society. He is the friend of the Prince S, and Prince S is the betrothed of the second daughter of the general. I know it could be a bit confusing, but stay with me. Evgeny, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly, recently was shit upon by Nastasia one day while this group of people were just like walking downtown and just like enjoying the beautiful weather, kind of mingling among their society and their acquaintances. Nastasia came up the road in this very grand and luxurious carriage, and she was just like shouting that Evgeny was in debt and that his uncle shot himself, committed suicide this morning at 7 a.m., and that he had a lot of debts and he's not who people think he is. And at first, people were on Evgeny's side because they have known Nastasia to be a mad woman, you know, a delirious woman, a woman who just doesn't stop at anything to destroy people who she doesn't like. And so at first, they all were on Evgeny's side. And then Prince S, who was friend of Evgeny, kind of spoke and testified for his moral conduct and his honesty, basically. But turned out, later down the road, we found out that Evgeny was revealed to not be as truthful as we thought. And so that made me think and kind of question once again about why Nastasia was doing what she was doing, whether or not she was doing it out of just pure revenge and hatred and just like unpleasant against these people, or was she doing that out of just like pure good and just trying to reveal people's true natures and true intentions for who they are? I feel like once again Nastasia is the other extreme of Mushkin. Mushkin, the way that he helps other people to come to their senses and to kind of come back to their good nature is through a lot of flattery, is through kind of helping them rise to the surface. Sometimes it could be kind of complimenting them and just like saying lots of good things about them to incentivize them to do the good things and not go back to doing the bad things in the past or what they're currently doing, right? But I feel like the way Nastasia differs from Mushkin is how she constantly shames people. She constantly puts them in the position of weakness, inferiority, low position, if you will, kind of like pushing them down to hit rock bottom so that they are forced to reconcile with themselves and really reflect on their past behaviors and whether or not what they're doing is good or morally gray or whatever it is. And since doing that, they were able to change and they were able to rise to the surface based on their own kind of inner power and inner strength. One reason for her way of kind of helping people, if you can call it that, is through Gania. And we talked about this. It's like previously what happened before everything with the carriage and this military man Yevgeny. Gania used to kind of propose to Nastasia, and I talked about how he wanted to marry Nastasia for her money, right? And because of that, he shamed him by kind of throwing a bunch of money into the fireplace and then telling him that since you are so desperate for money, why not just crawl into the fireplace and pick out all the money that I just kind of threw into the fireplace. And that act was very shameful. You know, it was very dehumanizing, belittling, if you will. Gania was able to restrain himself, and that's like the first instance where people either around them where the scene was happening or us readers were able to see this restraint and this kind of determination from Gania, because before then he's like notoriously famous for doing everything it takes for just like a couple of dollars or just like for a little amount of money. He's known to be that. So it's like money over dignity, basically. But after that incident of Nastasia kind of shaming him and pushing him and challenging him to restrain himself against like lots of money that were being thrown away and, you know, for no use. See how Gania is already changed and has changed, and that fact has been hinted upon by so many times throughout the book already, and I'm very interested to see why and how he changed and more evidences and more proof of how Gania has changed. And it's like a very contrasting thing to observe, because when Nastasia threw a lot of money into the fireplace, the other company, the other people around her were calling her like crazy, a mad woman, and they were begging her for them to be crawling into the fireplace for Gania, because Gania was just like standing there and letting all the cash being burned away. And so the other people, they could not stand that, so they were begging her, asking her permission for them to come in and pick the money out from the fire themselves, and she refused. And so just like seeing that kind of contradiction between people who were able to restrain themselves versus people who were not able to restrain themselves upon the sight of money being wasted, or just like upon just like a bunch of cash. Because if you think of it really deeply, you know, money is just paper until we assign them value and wealth and all these numbers that originally we didn't have money or cash or just like currency in general, right? And so that example really struck me and really once again kind of solidified in my head how Nastasia and Mushkin are the two sides of the same coin, when they have the same purpose of maybe trying to uplift people and change them for the better, but their approaches are very different, and because of that they are perceived by society differently. Whereas Mushkin was perceived to be this very honest, simple, sometimes an idiot, you know, but overall they looked at him with optimism, with a sense of delight, with a sense of pleasantness. Whereas whenever people talk about Nastasia, whenever her name was brought up in the book, in front of other people, in the company, in society in general, people either admire her for her beauty or they just like look at her and judge her for her madness, because what she's doing is absolute madness in their personal opinion. So they cannot come to grasp the deeper underlaying whatever meaning of her actions. And so that's very interesting. That's the first thing that struck me. The second thing that struck me was just like looming in the corner secret communication between Mushkin and Aglaya. So Aglaya is the youngest daughter of the general. So the general and his wife have 3 daughters. The oldest is Alexandra, the middle is Adelaida, and then the youngest was Aglaya. And at the very beginning of the book, Aglaya was talked about as this person with immense beauty, very striking beauty. She was like constantly being compared to Nastasia. And at the beginning, she seemed to be a person with good intentions, very polite, although sometimes too childish because she's still a child, too simple, things like that. And Mushkin complimented her, saying that she's very good natured. She's like simple and naive, but in a good way that's usually present in children. But then throughout the book, up until this point specifically, we've seen how she kind of changes. She's becoming increasingly more and more quick-tempered. She's becoming increasingly more and more kind of offensive and very defensive as well. And just like she jokes a lot, but she jokes in a manner of sometimes delirious, borderlining madness. Once again, this idea of female madness, female hysteria was very interesting. I do need to kind of journal a little bit more about that. And up until this point, there's like this secret communication between Mushkin and Aglaya, and I don't know if that's gonna be resulting in a marriage or, I don't know, a love interest, but it's like very interesting how she changes once again from being so-called good to being so-called mad. I don't think she's gonna be an evil person, or at least yet up until this point, but I can see the potential in her becoming a lot more evil and malicious, and her intentions becoming a lot darker than what they are now. So that's all the thoughts that I have up until the 50% mark. Really intrigued. Like I mentioned, I hit a reader block, but then after that, it kind of like goes downhill. It's very smooth, very interesting again, very intriguing to me. I'm like slowly trying to solve this mystery of who is good and who is evil. I think like Dostoevsky is doing that intentionally because people just keep changing, and people who I thought were bad turned out to be having good intentions behind all of their so-called provocative and unusual behaviors, and people who I thought were noble and good-natured and kind now is turning out to be, somewhat questionable in terms of their characteristic. Just like a lot of things going on. But that being said, to sum up my reading experience so far, it's been very thought-provoking, very reflective, deep, and it forces me to read very slowly and taking notes, which I really appreciate. Okay, I'm gonna keep going, and I think I'm gonna catch you when I get to the 70% mark or whenever I have another update. But let me know if all the thoughts that I've had so far in the video resonate with you. If you've read Dostoevsky's The Idiot before, just let me know, because it's also my first Dostoevsky, and I feel like this is one of the books that I'm gonna be rereading just because of how deep and dense and packed full of meaning it is. But because of that, that's why it's a classic, So I'm gonna see you in a second. Guys, I think we misunderstood Aglaya completely. She didn't have an intention to be in love or be in a romantic relationship with Mushkin. The reason why she sent him a note saying that they should meet up on a random morning at 7 a.m. at a given park that she pointed out to him earlier was because she wanted to befriend him and not to talk about her love for him or whatsoever. So they are PG-13. That completely caught me off guard. I did not expect that. And once again, that just further proves that Dostoevsky was very intentional about kind of messing with the readers, because I was just like going off on a rant earlier about why I thought Aglaya was like becoming evil and having like bad intentions and malicious intent. But then she was just, the poor girl just wanted a friend. You know, she didn't fit in. She didn't feel like she belonged into her family. There are so many expectations against her that she didn't want to. One of them being that she needed to get married, but she didn't want to get married. She wanted to run away from home and just like explore, travel, see different cultures, different countries, different cities, get an education for her own, things like that. And then I misunderstood her. My bad. But here we are with another reading update about The Idiot by Dostoevsky. I got to the 67% mark of Dostoevsky, and things are, I don't want to say they were picking up, because they have been picking up since the beginning. It's very like action based, and lots of things are going on with this very seemingly small group of people, but things just keep happening to them every so often, you know, every couple of chapters, and I felt so bad for Mushkin. Like, before I stopped last night to go to bed, I was reading until the point where the poor guy like was just like wanting to go to sleep, because he has spent like an entire day just like walking and then meeting Nastasia, and there's like this incident about Nastasia in the carriage and just like everything. And he was also having a lot of conversation with people. It was also his birthday, so he stayed up late talking to people, celebrating his birthday, kind of mingling in society. And then he had this like early meeting with Aglaya, and he just finished meeting with her, and he's like relieved because she didn't want to be in a relationship with him, right? And he was just like walking back to his residence, and he wanted just like a good sleep, a nap, not even a sleep, just a nap. And he just kept getting disrupted, and people just kept wanting to talk to him and then wanting his opinions on their like issues and businesses. And I just felt so bad for him. It's just like kind of funny, to be honest. I do want to talk about another thing besides the fact that we misunderstood Aglaya. I wanted to talk about something that happened on the birthday of Mushkin. So very late at night, when people were celebrating, I think it was almost midnight, or they're about to go to bed, but this young man whose name is Hippolyte, Hippo and then Lyte. His name reminds me a lot of Hippolytus. If you've read the Phaedra and Hippolytus Greek tragedy play, his name reminded me a lot of Hippolytus, and that, I don't know how I feel about that. Is it intentional or not? But anyway, I digress. But Hippolyte, he was an invalid, so he was very ill. He apparently had a disease or just like a condition to him that prevents him from living a long life. So he was predicted to pass away in the next 3 weeks or something. And today, on Mushkin's birthday, it was the last fortnight that he's gonna stay on this earth, and then after that he's gonna be projected to die, basically. But because of that, Hippolyte, on this random birthday of Mushkin, he decided to share a document or some of his writings that he made last night or a couple of days ago, and he wanted to share with them. And that document was named My Necessary Explanation. Reading about his explanation and just like some of his writings and his thoughts and dialogues were very interesting to me. And I think essentially this document was raising the question of, is life enough in itself? Just like being alive and being able to sustain yourself and survive, and just like breathing and being able to breathe on a daily basis, is that enough to grant you wealth and riches? Because he was saying, quote, all men esteem life far too lightly, live it far too carelessly and lazily, and are therefore one and all unworthy of it. Coming from himself, he's an invalid, he's about to die. And then he looks at other people who are healthy and alive, very much so alive, who are wasting away their lives, who are not doing anything of significance value for their life, who are not working hard, who are not building relationships or are meaningful, who are just like living and kind of like doozing away and just like kind of, like I mentioned, wasting away their life. Whereas he, Hippolyte, who wants to live, like who's very desperate to live and wants to keep living and doing everything that he wants for his legacy, he cannot because he's about to die. Reading about that made me kind of think a lot about the definition of life and also the value of life just as it is, without any materialistic value on top, without you having to be rich, without you having to be very educated whatsoever. Just like being alive is worth fighting for. And he also says that, quote, I could not understand, among other things, how all these people with so much life in and before them do not become rich. So reading this, I don't know how I feel about this, because he's basically arguing that you being alive is enough for you to gain riches and for you to become rich. Like, that's the only condition that you need to work and earn money and become wealthy. So the fact that there are living people, alive people, whatever, who are not rich or who are poor is unacceptable, and that their poorness is unjustifiable because they have everything that they need, aka being alive and life itself, to make their own empire. Basically, it's saying that they have no excuse to be poor. And to me, that's a very naive way of looking at the question of wealth and who is wealthy and things like that. And maybe since this is written like decades ago, I think maybe life back then was a lot different, but I still think that the hierarchy is everywhere. No matter if it was like a century ago or even now, the hierarchy still exists and the caste system still exists. And the caste system, no matter what time period you're in, it will exclude certain group of people and include certain group of people. And so Hippolyte, by him saying that, is kind of like overlooking the systemic restraints and oppression that prevent people from climbing the social ladder even if they want to. And for example, like women, if we're talking about Russian, like old Russian society, or just even like any society prior to the modern day time, where women are looked down upon in the sense that they're not allowed to be in a position of power. They have certain expectations to them. For example, Aglaia. So Hippolyte saying that when there is a character like Aglaia who is struggling to find her own purpose because she's not allowed to do things that she wants to do because it's not societally acceptable, is very naive to me. And so he's maybe talking from a position of privilege because, if you're talking about other men, then sure, maybe they don't have other excuses because they are at the top of the hierarchy. But there are also lots of assumptions to his statement that you have to be like a white male, in this society for you to have everything laid in front of you and accessible at your fingertips. So maybe in that sense, then there's no excuse for those people to not be rich and not earn a living for themselves. And obviously, there's always something else to the story. Even if somebody who is a white male and they have everything that they need, they're also to blame if they're not working and they're not actively creating a life for themselves. And sure, they're also to blame. But if we're talking about somebody, for example, people of color in society or black people who might not have all the resources that are available to a white male, if you add another layer of if that person doesn't come from a family of wealth or nobleness or just like high ranking in society, then that's another different matter. Just like comparing all of the characters and seeing how they reflect upon each other was very, very interesting. And so that's one thing that struck me, and I don't necessarily agree with Hippolyte's kind of statement about having life is enough for somebody to make a living for themselves and to become so-called rich and wealthy. But the other statement about how all men esteem life far too lightly, live it far too carelessly and lazily, and are therefore one and all unworthy of it. Once again, the first statement, the first half of the sentence, I agree. Like, some people, they take life for granted, and that's why I'm very grateful for being able to wake up every single day and for my body to have enough health and, flexibility and strength to carry me through the different tasks that I need to do. And I know that some people, they don't have that privilege. But then the second half of the statement, where it says that all men are therefore one and all unworthy of it. I don't think that's sitting right with me. I feel like everybody is deserving of life. Even if a criminal, they also deserve to live, and they also deserve to be sentenced and judged justly and accordingly to the law. And so just like lots of thoughts about who is deserving of life, but also who is deserving of wealth, riches, and a stable standing in society. So that's the second thing I want to talk about in this update. It's been once again going very fun, very thought-provoking. Once again, it's a very thought-provoking read. I'm taking so many notes. I'm very, very excited. I think I can get to the 80% mark today. I don't have work tonight, so I'm super excited to be diving deeper into The Idiot by Dostoevsky. But let me know how you feel so far up until this point of all the points that I have talked about. Okay, another thing before we go is Nastasia was communicating with Aglaia, the youngest daughter of the general. Nastasia was basically sending Aglaia a lot of letters, like 3 to be specifically, and the letters are very weird. I'm at the point where I'm reading the letter as alongside the characters, and it was a metaphor, I think. Like, even though Nastasia sent the letters to Aglaia, I think the person that she wanted to send the letters to was Prince Mushkin. The reason why I say this is because the letters are written in a way that it's very objective. It's not subjective or not very unique to Aglaia. Like, it could be read either way. It could be read that she is talking to a friend, which is Aglaia, but it also could be read in a sense that she's actually writing those letters to her lover. And since we know that Nastasia is not in love with Aglaia because they never even met, they met, but they haven't been conversing and talking and kind of mingling with each other like significantly throughout the book, so we know that that's not a possible ending for the both of them. So the other person that has hinted upon to be Nastasia, like kind of like ideal lover, is Mushkin. And so reading it's kind of cringy in the sense that I know who these letters are intended for, but the fact that they're sent to Aglaia just makes everything a lot more complicated. Because of that, Aglaia openly mentioned to Mushkin that she thought that these letters are for him, and so that's why another kind of reason why she kind of met up with him at 7 a.m. at the bench was to give him these letters because they are not for her. And then I'm at the point where Mushkin is reading the letter now, and I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know if he's gonna, do anything about this letters or situation. But it's very interesting, like forbidden love aspect, but not forbidden love in the sense that they hate each other or they don't love each other. I feel like Mushkin has a soft spot for Nastasia, but I also really admire him how he's like standing firm in his boundaries and his grounds, because he knows that he cannot love Nastasia the way that she wants to be loved, the way that she wants to be cherished, and he cannot give her the love that she wants. He loves her, but only as a friend and maybe sometimes as a sister and not a lover or a woman or a female, knowing that he's like intentionally trying to not avoid her, but just not interacting with her, to not give her like hopes or expectations, things like that. But then, I don't know, Nastasia, maybe because of that like distance between herself and Mushkin, she grows fonder and maybe sometimes a bit crazy over Mushkin as well. So I'm very excited to read more from their perspective, and I once again feel bad for Mushkin because he's in such a complicated situation. If I were to be in his like shoes, I also wouldn't know how to act, because what do you mean? Like, do you just forsake your own morals and boundaries to save this woman for the sake of saving her? Or do you just like stand firm on your boundaries and make sure that you don't also get dragged into this very messy relationship, like love triangle-ish, or even like a fourth triangle already, like not even a triangle, a love rectangle now, and sometimes maybe it could be like a love pentagon or whatever, it's like involving a lot of people. It's like the first time that I've seen the main protagonist be in such a weird complicated, frustrating position, like a position where you cannot just like forsake everything, you know, you cannot just get away because you can't, you know, your morals don't allow you to just leave out of nowhere, you know, you have to stay and deal with everything and try to resolve it with other people. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna stop rambling now. I'm gonna keep reading and I'll catch you in a second. A couple of days later, and I finally got to the 90% mark of The Idiot. So I definitely think we could finish this book today, and I'm super excited to see what's going on. Okay, so see, I have some thoughts. I saw a video on TikTok earlier about somebody also finishing The Idiot by Dostoevsky, and they were kind of giving their review, and they mentioned about how this book was essentially a question about, can like genuine goodness exist in a world like today or even back then in society, you know? The one thing that the creator who just finished The Idiot was kind of taking away from this book was how Mushkin was kind of this embodiment of pure genuine goodness, and because genuine goodness is so rare in such a calculated society filled with, you know, insults and overlooking other people's, lots of belittling of other people, Mushkin is constantly referred to as the idiot. To be honest, maybe I was not reading very closely and I was not kind of putting myself in his shoes to think about how he would feel when other people just call him the idiot all the time. I did feel a sense of uneasiness at the beginning because I was surprised at how people was constantly laughing at him. And I don't know, maybe the translation that I got did not make that very clear, but in my personal opinion, you know, it was just like laughing. And I don't know if maybe laughing back then was a sign of mocking and was a sign of the other party, whatever, is looking down upon Mushkin or the person who's speaking. And now looking back after hearing her review, I could definitely see that, because the amount of jokes and the amount of like laughs and the amount of just like careless exclamation about Mushkin being an idiot that's like frequently throughout the book can be signs that people on the one hand value him and respect him for his generosity, his honesty, but on the other hand, they also deem him to be too simplistic and also too naive and therefore an idiot on some occasions. But anyway, so that's my initial thoughts after watching that video on TikTok. It's very interesting. It makes me rethink up until this point the entire experience of seeing Mushkin and how he was treated in society. But speaking of how Mushkin was treated in society, it's a very interesting point that I'm at right now where Mushkin is kind of, I don't know, thought to be Aglaya's husband. It was like odd how they came to that agreement and like that kind of fate or marriage proposal, because Aglaya was very hesitant and was very against marrying Mushkin, but somehow maybe their parents, like the general and Mrs. Epankin, was like, okay, that's set in stone and we should introduce him to society and our friends and our relatives like ASAP. And that's what Mushkin did. He was being introduced or shown off to society as Aglaya's husband. I put a question mark there because I didn't know why this happened, because just earlier Aglaya was like, no, it's all like bullshit, you know, forget what I just said. It's all like childish playing or doesn't have any value. Because she was saying, okay, I accept your proposal, but then the next second she's like, oh, don't worry about it, never mind, I take that back. So it was like Aglaya is a very, I don't know if she's like interesting or she's just like very indecisive and she just cannot get over her pride and ego. You know what, that's an ego. That's another thing that I want to talk about in a second. So Mushkin was being introduced to society, and at first it went very well. Like everybody perceived him very positively. He was received with utmost respect and calm and also kindness. But then later on, something was brought up by one person in the company, and it was about Mushkin's father who passed away. His name is Pavlovchev. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know. But anyway, Mushkin's father was brought up, and at first he was praised. Like, he was like a good, decent man, very honest. I think he used to be in the military as well. But then later on, somebody said that he turned Catholic. And at that point, it causes such kind of like a rupture in society, or just in like their small society. Because back in the day, maybe Catholicism and Christianity were not seeing eye to eye. So people who were Catholic don't like Christians, and especially Christians in the Russian society, they look down upon on Catholics. Because especially we see this perspective and view through Mushkin. When Mushkin heard the other person kind of accusing, that's the word that was used, accusing his father to be Catholic or unchristian, he broke down and he kind of went down this rabbit hole of trying to defend his father, saying how that's not possible because Christian is tied with good and kindness and just like all the pure virtues in society, whereas Catholicism was like evil, was malicious, and people who usually follow Catholicism or practice Catholic rituals are the people who are very thirsty. Bear with me because this is a very interesting point. So basically, Mushkin argues that people who are Catholic or atheist were so thirsty for a community, a sense of belonging, for faith, that they were willing to believe in anything, including Catholicism and atheism. So if we feed them something else, such as Christianity, which is good, they would turn out to be good and better person or people. And kind of this relationship between Catholicism and evil and Christianity and goodness was very interesting. I haven't done my research in terms of why that's the case. So if anybody has any insight in terms of that, like maybe I feel like this has to do with history and, the politics back then. So when Mushkin's father was accused of being Catholic, Mushkin cannot believe it because his father was a good person. And so every single good person in Russian society back then was automatically a Christian. But if you're a bad person, doesn't mean you're going to be Catholic. But if you're a good person, you're 100% Christian. So that's the first thing that I noticed that was mentioned when religion was brought up, because throughout the book, like, there's no mention whatsoever about religion, faith, things like that. And the other thing that was talked about was about this performative nature of aristocracy. When Mushkin first met this society, this small representative society that kind of mimics Russian society at large, he was very, like I mentioned, he was very positive. They were talking, they were chatting, they were mingling, right? The narration switched to third person. I mean, it's only third person, but the narration certainly took a very critical and philosophical lens, looking at this aristocratic kind of company, saying that, quote, the majority of the guests, who were but an empty-headed lot after all, in spite of their aristocratic bearing, never guessed, in their self-satisfied composure, that much of what was good in them was merely artistic development gloss, end quote. And this was very interesting to me. This is the first time also where we see the true extent of the luxury and the kind of the wealth of the middle class and the upper class in Russian society. Before that, it was hinted upon how the generals Panikins and his family were middle class, but we didn't have any overly descriptive description or paragraphs kind of picturing or portraying them in a wealth-associated, wealth-adjacent way, using all of the vocabulary usually associated with the luxury, like the clothes, their manners, describing their facial expressions. But here, when Mushkin was introduced to society, suddenly everybody was described in very great detail. like somebody who was a poet and somebody else who was a salutary, and then somebody else who used to be in the military. And they were described less so in terms of their characteristic, but more so in terms of how they looked like. They looked to be very polished, very poised, very elegant, very poignant. Their facial expressions was very good natured, very educated. All of those vocabulary I thought to be very wealth adjacent vocabularies, and that once again helps to paint a picture of this middle class, upper class society of Russian with wealth, luxury, and privileges at the end of the day. It's interesting how that was presented to us first. And then the narrator, or Dostoevsky in this case, immediately followed that with the quote that I just read to you. It was like a critique upon that kind of wealth and luxurious setting and those people as a whole, because they thought themselves to be very educated. They thought themselves to be very above everybody else, right? To be like basically at the top of the hierarchy in Russian society. But then they don't know that they are just performing. They don't know that they are just doing artistic development, and all of their so-called aristocratic manners and behaviors and postures and composures were merely just artistic development. So it's very interesting how Dostoevsky comparing those two together. And I'm not saying this to kind of devalue artistic development, because that's very, very valuable, right? But reducing aristocracy to just merely art is a very interesting way or interesting take by Dostoevsky. And once again, that is a critique, and that's saying something. That's saying something. This also was used to talk about Mushkin. So I don't know if that specific quote was also directed towards Mushkin or not, because technically he is also a member of the middle class or the upper class, if you can say so. But he's very inherently different and distinctively different from each and every one of them, right? Oh, and then another one that I do want to kind of read is about Aglaia. And like I mentioned, she's a very interesting character. I'm kind of like frustrated with her to a certain degree, because I don't know what she wants. To be honest, I don't know what she wants. Maybe that's intentional, because you know how if you are among company who kind of told you to go according to their directions and instructions, that leaves you no room to make your own decisions and have your own autonomy and agency. That could be confusing. You know, you also are fighting against your old beliefs and instincts to follow other people's instructions and be a people pleaser, but you also are trying to kind of nurture your own sense of direction. She's in a very frustrating position herself, where she cannot help but keep doing whatever her parents told her to do, but at the same time wanting to create her own sense of freedom and trying to make a life for herself out of all these normal, stereotypical expectation bestowed upon women for a middle-class Russian society. So I could understand why she was so contradictory in the way that she acts, and in the way that she's very quick-tempered and very quick to throw a tantrum and throw a fit. One point when she was talking to somebody, I don't know, or talking to Mushkin, I think, or her parents, there's this quote by Aglaia that made me appreciate her more for her sense of critical thinking even. She said, quote, "How mean it all is, and how funny. We were always middle class. Thoroughly middle-class people. Why should we attempt to climb into the giddy heights of the fashionable world? My sisters are all for it. It's fine, Prince S. They have to thank for poisoning their minds." End quote. I'm gonna leave you at that. I feel like that speaks very well to her rebellious and provocative nature, and how she was able to critically look and examine her family's position and whether or not what they're doing is actually for themselves or for just, once again, artistic development. I'm gonna go ahead and finish this book today, and then we're gonna close off the vlog. I know it's been a very long vlog, but I hope you have been enjoying it. I'm gonna go ahead and close the vlog maybe tomorrow, and I'll give you my final verdict on The Idiot by Dostoevsky. Deep breath. I finished The Idiot and I'm ready to talk about it. After a couple of hours of marinating on my thoughts and insights and just like my feelings surrounding that book, I'm ready to talk about The Idiot. I think this book lands around 4.25 to 4.5 for me. The ending was a bit unexpected, very much so, very much unexpected to be honest. I did not see that coming at all. That was like such an epic plot twist. But it's also a plot twist that made me feel very, very heavy and like, I don't know, deep, because I feel a lot for Mushkin. I think he doesn't deserve that ending, but at the same time I understand why the ending happened and why the book concluded the way that it concluded. I think it added another layer of depth and meaning and just forcing the readers to think a bit deeply and critically about why Dostoevsky wrote the ending the way that he did. I think this is one of those books that will stick with me for a very long time. I think throughout the entire process of me reading this book with you, I have been asking this question of whether or not genuine goodness and kindness and just a good person, can they exist in a society where calculations and just lots of thought goes into just like interactions with people. So sometimes the goodness and the kindness that we know cannot really survive among all of those harsh conditions. Because if you're like Mushkin, a person with genuine and good intentions, people would think you to be too simplistic. And the ending was the answer to the question that maybe not. Maybe genuine goodness and kindness just cannot exist in today's society, and that it will be corrupted, it will be changed, it will be affected by some circumstance, by some event, either through gossip or either it be through some sort of, love or romantic relationships. And I think that's exactly what happened to Mushkin. I'm not gonna spoil it. I feel like you should go read the book. But to me, it's just a very heavy note. It's a very heavy ending. But at the same time, it's a wake-up call. It is a reminder that even though there are good people in society, sometimes the society that we have is not built to be welcoming and to sustain and uplift all of those good people, and that all the calculations, all the, I don't want to say bad people, but the people with not so good intentions, not so pure intention, with a lot more calculations and just a lot more on their end of trying to take advantage of other people, those people can actually kind of push the good people down and down to the lower levels of society. That's just very sad. I think this is one of those books that really, really will stick with me. But that being said, that is the end of this vlog. I know it's probably gonna be such a long video. I just know for a fact I've been yapping for a while now, but I hope you get something out of this vlog and this video. I really enjoyed reading The Idiot with you guys and just like jotting down notes and just reflecting and sharing what I got out of each of the phases and each of the parts of the books that I was at. If you want me to do more of these kind of classic, reading vlogs, just let me know down in the comment section. If you have another book that you would like for me to do a full reading video on, just let me know. I have like Moby Dick, that's like the next book that's pretty intimidating, and also Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky as well. We can read it together if you want to. But anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking all the way to the end. I hope you had an amazing day so far, or if not, you will have an amazing rest of your day. And I will be seeing you with another episode very soon. And until then, bye bye. Take care.